House felt wrong after Patricia died. Not wrong in a way I could explain to anyone who asked. The neighbors were kind. My son called every Sunday. My doctor said I was in good health for 64. Everything was technically fine, but the house, our house, the one we'd bought in Barry 31 years ago when the street was still mostly gravel and the winters felt like an adventure, that house had stopped making sense without her in it. She used to hum in the kitchen. I never told her I could hear it from the garage, some old song she half remembered, never the full melody, just a few bars repeated over and over. I used to find it mildly annoying. I would give anything to hear it now. For the first 8 months after she passed, I kept the house exactly as it was. Her cardigan stayed on the hook by the back door, her reading glasses on the side table. I told myself I was being practical. I wasn't ready to sort things. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that I was afraid if I moved anything, I'd have to admit that she wasn't coming back to look for it. My son visited when he could. He lived in Guelph with his wife and their 2 kids, about an hour and a half south. He's a good man. I want to be clear about that, because what came later, what I'm going to tell you, it doesn't change who he is at his core. He loved his mother. He loves me. But love and wisdom don't always travel together, and sometimes the people closest to us make suggestions that come from a good place and lead somewhere terrible. He started talking about the house in October of that first year, said he was worried about me rattling around in a 4-bedroom on my own, said the property taxes alone were brutal, and he wasn't wrong. Barry had changed, the whole corridor up from Toronto had changed, and what we paid for that house in 1993, and what it was worth now were numbers from different planets. He said I should think about liquidating, take the equity, simplify my life. I wasn't ready to hear it in October. By January, after a furnace scare and a week of ice that made the driveway genuinely dangerous, I started listening. His wife had been part of these conversations from the beginning. She was organized, practical, quick with numbers. She'd worked in finance in her 30s before the kids came along, and she still thought in spreadsheets. She laid out the math one evening over dinner at their place, how much the house would likely sell for, what I'd clear after fees, what that money could generate in a decent GIC or a conservative portfolio. She was thorough. She was persuasive. I remember thinking she was exactly the kind of person Patricia would have liked, because Patricia had no patience for vagueness, and neither did my daughter-in-law. The plan, as it was presented to me, was straightforward. I would sell the house in Barry. I would move into the spare bedroom in their home in Guelph. I would be close to the grandchildren. Owen was 7, Sophie was 4, and I would no longer be alone. In exchange, I would contribute to the household, not as a tenant, as family, a few $100s a month toward groceries and utilities, maybe help with the kids on school days, that sort of thing. Nothing formal. Just people taking care of each other. I told them I'd think about it. I thought I'd think about it. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I walked through every room of the house in Barry and said goodbye to things slowly, privately. The garage where I'd spent entire Saturdays on projects that never quite got finished. The backyard where Patricia had tried 4 times to grow tomatoes and succeeded once, spectacularly, the summer before she got sick. The corner of the master bedroom where the light came through in the morning in a way that made everything look gentler than it was. In March, I listed the house. It sold in 11 days. Firm offer, no conditions, $22,000 over asking. My realtor called it a clean transaction. I called it the end of the longest chapter of my life. I moved into the spare bedroom in Guelph on a Thursday in April. My son had painted it the week before. There was a new lamp on the dresser, a small television. It smelled like fresh paint and somebody else's fabric softener. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night with my hands in my lap and I thought, this is the right thing. I'd said that to myself 100 times in the preceding weeks, and I would keep saying it until I believed it. The first few months were good. I'll say that honestly because it matters for the rest of the story. They were genuinely good. Owen had started 2nd grade, and I walked him to the bus stop most mornings, and those 10 minutes on the sidewalk, him talking about whatever 7-year-olds talk about. Pokemon cards, and a kid in his class named Brody, who had done something impressive or outrageous depending on the day, were the best part of my week. Sophie was still home with her mother in the mornings, and she'd taken to sitting next to me at the kitchen table while I had my coffee, lining up her small plastic animals in rows of her own devising. I was cooking 3 or 4 nights a week. I did the grocery runs. I handled the yard, mowing, the fall cleanup, recorking the back deck where water had been getting in. I paid my $500 a month without being asked, and I was glad to do it. I wasn't a burden. I was contributing. That mattered to me more than I knew how to say. My son and his wife were busy in the way that people in their late 30s with 2 kids and 2 careers are always busy. There was always a deadline, always a school thing, always a car that needed something. I tried to make myself useful without getting in the way. I tried to read the room. I thought I was doing a decent job of it. The first sign that something had shifted came in November. My daughter-in-law mentioned, casually, that a colleague of hers had bought a duplex in Hamilton and was clearing $1,400 a month on the lower unit. She said it in the way people say things they've been thinking about for a while and have decided to release carefully, one sentence at a time. I noted it and let it pass. A week later, she mentioned that a spare bedroom in a house could generate significant income, especially with rental demand the way it was in Guelph. I said something neutral. I was good at neutral by then. The third conversation wasn't neutral on either side. It was a Sunday afternoon in early December. My son was at the hardware store. The kids were at her sister's. She came into the kitchen where I was reading and sat down across from me, and I could tell from the way she sat, straight, hands flat on the table, that this was not going to be a casual chat. She said she wanted to talk about the finances of the house. I said of course. She said that they'd been looking at their budget and things were tighter than they'd expected. The mortgage rate had adjusted. The property taxes had gone up again. She listed the numbers clearly, and I recognized the cadence from that first dinner. She'd prepared for this. Then she said that the spare room was, realistically, worth between $1,600 and $1,800 a month in the current market. That a proper tenant would pay that, utilities negotiated separately. I said I understood that. She said that she and my son had discussed it, and they felt it was fair to ask me to either match what a tenant would pay or to consider contributing a lump sum from the proceeds of my house sale to help offset the mortgage, something in the range of $40,000 to $50,000. I kept my face still. I'd worked 31 years as a mechanical engineer, and I'd sat through a lot of meetings where keeping your face still was the only professional option. I asked if my son knew she was having this conversation with me today. She said they'd discussed it together. I said I'd need some time to think. She said that was fair, but she wanted me to know that if the finances couldn't work out, they'd need the room, that a proper tenant would solve their problem, that she hoped we could find an arrangement that worked for everyone. I said I understood. I went back to my book. She went upstairs. I read the same paragraph 4 times and didn't retain a word of it. That evening after dinner, I watched my son put the kids to bed, and I tried to find the version of events where this conversation had happened the way she described, the 2 of them sitting down together, looking at the numbers, reaching a mutual decision. I tried to believe it. I almost managed it, which tells you something about how much I wanted things to be okay. I called my old friend Douglas the next morning. We'd worked together at the same firm in Barry for nearly 20 years, and he was the kind of man who listened without offering solutions until you'd finished talking. I laid out the whole thing. When I was done, there was a long pause, and then he said, "Owen, what do you actually want?" Nobody had asked me that in a long time. I thought about it for 3 days. Not what was practical, not what would keep the peace, not what my son would want me to decide. What did I want? I wanted a place that was mine, a door I could lock, a kitchen where I decided what was on the counter, a morning routine that belonged to me. I hadn't let myself want those things because wanting them felt like ingratitude. These people had opened their home. I had told myself the situation was generous, and it had been, at first, but something had changed. Or maybe something had always been there and I just hadn't seen it clearly. I looked at my finances. I had done well from the house sale, and I'd been careful with money my whole life. Patricia and I both had. I had a pension from my years at the firm, modest but reliable. I had RRSPs I hadn't touched. I was not rich, but I was not desperate. I had options. I started looking at apartments in early January. quietly, on my phone, while the kids were in school and my daughter-in-law was working from home upstairs, and my son was in Guelph somewhere doing whatever he did on Tuesdays. I found a 2-bedroom in a low-rise near Riverside Park. Second floor, east-facing, a covered parking spot included. The building was well maintained. I checked the maintenance fee history, I read the condo rules, I walked the property twice before I made an appointment to see the unit. Old habits. I'd spent 3 decades evaluating systems for failure points. The apartment was good. Quiet. Clean lines. A second bedroom I could use as a workshop, which was something I'd been missing since Barry more than I'd admitted. The kitchen was smaller than I was used to, but the layout was sensible. There was a balcony that got morning light. I put in an application on a Wednesday. I got approved on Friday. I didn't tell my son until Sunday. I waited until after dinner, after the kids were in bed, and I asked him to come sit with me in the living room. My daughter-in-law stayed in the kitchen. I don't know if she knew what was coming. I told him I'd found an apartment, that I'd be moving out at the end of the month, that I was grateful for the time I'd spent there, and I loved him and I loved his kids, and none of that was changing. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked if this was about the conversation with his wife. I said it was part of it. I said I'd done some thinking and realized I needed my own space and that this was the right move for me. He said he was sorry about what she'd said, that it hadn't come out the way he'd intended it to. I said I believed him. I do believe him. He asked if I was angry. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said I wasn't angry. I was clear there's a difference, and it took me 64 years to understand it. Anger keeps you facing backward. Clarity points you toward the door. He nodded. He looked tired. He looked like a man who understood more about his situation than he was ready to say out loud, and I felt for him in a way that was uncomplicated and real. I moved out on the last Saturday of January. Douglas came down from Barry with his truck. We made 2 trips and we were done by early afternoon. He helped me set up the bed in the kitchen, and then we sat on the balcony with 2 mugs of coffee and watched the light change over the park. The first morning I woke up in that apartment alone, I lay there for a few minutes before I got up. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The sounds were different, a different street, a different building settling into the cold. But the quiet was mine. I made coffee and took it out to the balcony. It was February, technically too cold to sit outside, but I'd bought a decent chair and I had a good jacket, and I'd spent enough winters in this province to know the difference between cold that discourages you and cold that just requires a heavier coat. The part below was mostly empty. 1 person walking a dog along the path by the river. A jogger. The bare trees. The kind of still that Ontario gets in February before the light starts to come back. I thought about Patricia. I thought about what she would say if she could see me sitting on that balcony in the cold with my coffee, starting over at 64. She would probably say something dry and honest, the way she always did. She would probably say it was about time. Owen and Sophie came to see the apartment 3 weeks later. Owen asked immediately about the second bedroom and whether there was room for a sleeping bag so he could stay over. Sophie walked the entire perimeter of the kitchen very seriously, touching each cabinet door in sequence, conducting some kind of inspection I didn't fully understand. I told Owen, yes, there was absolutely room for a sleeping bag. My son and his wife stood in the doorway and looked around. She said it was a nice building. She said it was something in her voice that I didn't try to analyze. My son said he was glad I had good light. We had lunch together. It was not strained, or at least not unbearably so. The kids ate their sandwiches and argued about something that had happened at school, and my son and I talked about hockey, which is what we always talk about when we don't know what else to say, and eventually the afternoon wound down and they left. I washed the lunch dishes and put them away and stood at the kitchen window for a minute looking out at the parking lot. I was not bitter. I want to say that clearly because bitterness is easy to reach for, and I have seen what it does to people over a long life. I had made a mistake in judgment, not a catastrophic one, but a real one, and I had corrected it, and the correcting had cost me something and given me something else in return. That is usually how it works. What I had given up, a proximity to my grandchildren that had been, in truth, the best part of the arrangement. Those walks to the bus stop, Sophie's kitchen inspections. What I had gained, a lock on my door that was mine alone. a workshop space where I could leave things half-finished without apologizing for the mess. A Saturday morning that belonged to no schedule but my own. Douglas started driving down from Bury once a month. We'd go to the farmer's market on Stone Road if the weather was decent, or just sit in the apartment with the hockey game on. His wife had passed 2 years before Patricia, and we had developed a comfortable rhythm. Two old men who had outlasted one version of their lives and were figuring out the next one. I started woodworking again. Small things at first. A cutting board, a set of shelves for the second bedroom, then a side table I made from some white oak I'd found at a place in Cambridge. Working with my hands had always cleared my head, and I had been away from it for too long, first in the fog of grief and then in the business of trying to fit myself into someone else's household. Owen came for his first sleepover in March. He brought 3 Pokémon card binders and a very specific request for pancakes in the morning. We stayed up too late and I let him win at cards, and he knew I was letting him win, but accepted it with the graciousness of a 7-year-old who has made his peace with adult charity. In the morning, I made the pancakes. He sat at my kitchen table in his sleeping bag. He had dragged it out of the bedroom and was wearing it like a robe, and ate 4 pancakes and told me about Brody, who had apparently evolved into an even more impressive or outrageous presence in 2nd grade. I listened to every word. That afternoon, when my son came to pick him up, Owen told his father that Grandpa's apartment was cool and that there was a park you could see from the balcony, and that Grandpa made the best pancakes. My son looked at me over Owen's head and smiled. A real one, the kind that cost something to give. I had not lost my son. I had not lost my grandchildren. What I had lost was an arrangement that had stopped working, and what I had found was something I should have insisted on from the beginning, a life that was sized correctly for the person I actually was. I am not the same man who hummed along to half-remembered songs in the kitchen at Barra. I am not the man Patricia married, not entirely, because losing someone that thoroughly changes you in ways you don't get to choose. But I am still standing. I have a balcony. I have morning light. I have a project on the workbench in the 2nd bedroom that's been there for 6 weeks, and nobody is waiting for me to put it away. Some mornings I sit outside with my coffee, and the park is coming back to life now. The trees have leaves. The joggers have shed their heavy coats. There are kids on the path again on weekday afternoons. I drink my coffee slowly. I don't rush. Patricia would have something dry to say about all of it. I can almost hear her. Almost is enough. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened. On that balcony, mostly, with my coffee going cold, because I keep forgetting to drink it when I'm thinking. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened was sudden. The conversation my daughter-in-law had with me that Sunday afternoon didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of a slow accumulation of small choices, hers, my son's, and mine. I had chosen to be agreeable when I should have been clear. I had chosen comfort over honesty, telling myself the arrangement was fine long after I'd quietly stopped believing it. That's on me. You can't outsource your own clarity to other people and then be surprised when the terms shift underneath you. What she did, laying out that ultimatum, putting a dollar figure on family, wasn't right. I won't dress it up. There's something that goes wrong in a person when they start seeing generosity as a vulnerability to leverage. I had sold my home, given up the life Patricia and I built together on that street in Bury, and moved into their spare room with nothing but goodwill. I cooked. I paid. I walked Owen to the bus in the cold. And still it wasn't enough, because enough wasn't really the point. The point was control, and when you understand that, you stop being confused and start being useful to yourself. Douglas asked me what I actually wanted, and that question did more for me than 6 months of trying to keep the peace had done. That's the thing about wisdom. It doesn't always arrive as a grand insight. Sometimes it arrives as a simple question from an old friend in your kitchen on a Tuesday morning. The honest answer I gave him was the first genuinely intelligent thing I'd done in months. Not clever. Not strategic. Just honest. I wanted a door I could lock. I wanted mornings that belonged to me. Knowing what you want, clearly and without apology, is not selfishness. It's the foundation of every decent decision I've ever made. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, what it takes to actually move. To say I'm going, and mean it, without drama or ultimatums of your own. I had been afraid of inconveniencing my son, of seeming ungrateful, of admitting that the plan hadn't worked. That fear cost me months of quietly shrinking myself. But when I finally stopped being afraid of the disruption and just acted, it took 3 weeks. A phone call, an application, 2 trips in Douglas's truck. The thing I'd been paralyzed about was, in practical terms, a long weekend. The strength required wasn't physical. It was the willingness to disappoint people who had made themselves comfortable at my expense, and to survive the discomfort of that. Owen stays over now. He drags his sleeping bag out of the bedroom and wears it like a robe at the kitchen table and eats 4 pancakes and tells me about Brody. Sophie conducts her cabinet inspections. My son smiles at me sometimes the way you smile at someone when you're proud of them and don't quite know how to say it. I didn't get here by being angry. I got here by being honest, then clear, then willing. In that order. That's the whole of it.